All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Tyler Hutcherson, and it is good to meet some of you guys virtually. I work with Redis, and we are excited to be partnering with LabLab AI for a series of hackathons and initiatives over the next 2 months, where we're going to get to work together to build the next generation of AI native and AI enabled applications. And so the purpose of this video is I'm actually going to show you guys kind of the starting point for getting involved with Redis and using Redis in your stack. So if you go to the LabLab AI tech page, and you scroll all the way to the bottom, you can see here's this little block that the team made for Redis. And so this page has a bunch of information about Redis. You can read all of the helpful things. You can click all the links to docs. But if you're like me, you kind of want to get right into it and start building. So I want to go down to where this boilerplate section is, and I'm really interested in question and answering. So I'm going to click on this Q&A example. And the reason I pulled this up is because this is a great example of how to use Redis to augment OpenAI enabled workflows. And so one example I'm going to talk about is question and answering. We're all pretty familiar probably with the concept of creating embeddings from text. And so OpenAI has a series of APIs that they've released, and many of you are quite familiar with these. So I'm not going to spend too much time kind of diving into that, but we're going to talk about semantic search and we're going to talk about question and answering. And so with semantic search, it's a pretty straightforward process where raw documents are converted using OpenAI's APIs. There's also other embedding and model providers out there like Cohere and Hugging Face, and many more to come. So these documents are embedded and then stored in Redis. And so Redis, again, some of you guys might be curious, why is Redis here? Redis has, innovated a lot over the last 10 years. And so we've been continually adding developer-focused capabilities. And with the wave and the turning tide of AI that's happening in our ecosystem right now, we realized that vector databases are going to be the future. And so we enabled vector database capabilities through our Redis search module as of version 2.4, which is generally available everywhere. And so with Redis as a vector database, all of these embeddings that you've created from raw documents using the OpenAI embeddings API can be stored in Redis. And they can be stored in Redis, which is an in-memory, blazing fast database, has a lot of flexibility in how you can use it. And it's also been around for a long time. Most companies and developers are quite familiar. And so the way this works then in a semantic search context is then you can query that database using vector representations of questions or queries to try to find similar or relevant documents that have been sort of pre-stored inside that database. You can think of the database as like the knowledge context. It holds information about a set of data. Maybe it's a bunch of Wikipedia articles. Maybe it's news articles you've scraped from some site. Maybe it's documentation you've pulled from your favorite open source library. And so now this is where question and answering comes in. It builds on top of semantic search by enabling users like yourself to ask a question. OpenAI will use its embeddings API to convert that text into a list of numbers that we call an embedding or a vector. And then you can perform vector-based search operations called VSS, vector similarity search, to find relevant documents. Then using those relevant documents, say you wanted to find the 5 most relevant documents in the database to your question, you pass the text and the content from those documents into a prompt construction function. So that prompt will take the documents that you found from your query, along with some sort of helper information so that the OpenAI generation model can know what to do with it. So we're going to construct a prompt that's going to say, answer the question based on this exact information you see below. And if you don't know what it is, then just say, I don't know. And so you pass that to the OpenAI API for generation. It will answer the question and return to the user. So we put together this application to show how that might work. It's a really simple containerized demo. And I'm going to actually set this up as if I was doing this for the first time. Of course, I helped build this, so I'm probably more familiar than most of you in setting this up, but I'm going to try to go from scratch so you can see how it works. I want to say one thing before we start, which is in order to do any of this, you need, of course, your OpenAI API key. So you can go to platform.openai.com, sign up, get a key. You get a bunch of free credits to start. They're a really wonderful company to work with. So first thing is we're going to clone the repository. So I'm going to do git clone .com/Redis ventures /Redis openai Q&A. All right, so that's going to pull down the resources we need. I'm going to go into that folder. Just take a look around. You can see there's not that much here. It's pretty simple. There's Docker file, license file, README, and app, Docker Compose, a couple of basic things to get started. But I'm going to open this up in my favorite text editor, which is VS Code. And so from here, you can see there's your app folder that contains the actual Streamlit app that we're going to run, app.py. And then there's a folder of some images and things. You don't really need to worry about that. And then sort of our helper code. We're not going to go too much into the code here. My colleague Sam is probably going to do a live coding session. We might do a couple of them next week to kind of get you all in here, but I'm just getting you familiar with the repository structure. And so in here, we'll take this, and the first thing that the README is going to tell you to do is make a copy of the templated environment file. And that way, let's see, why is it not finding it? There we go. Okay. I don't know what that was about. So we're going to copy the template file. We're going to create a new environment file here. It's just an exact copy. The only difference is we're going to replace with your OpenAI API key, which of course I have mine saved off here to the side. You can try to steal this key if you want. I'm gonna turn it off here after this demo. But this is all you need to get started. Of course, you need Docker on your machine. You need Docker and Docker Compose, and you need your OpenAI API key. So I'm going to go ahead and do this. Docker Compose up. And now, if you've never built these before, the Docker Compose is basically set up in a really easy way to manage containers. This is not necessarily meant to be a production level service, of course. Like we have things like Kubernetes and other options like Slurm and things to run things in production, but this is perfect for prototyping. So here we've got a list of services. One is a Streamlit app. You can see here we've got a Docker file that this is actually going to run. That's why the context is saying here. It's going to look for the Docker file in this exact directory. We're going to name that container Streamlit. And it's going to build it. It's going to use the environment file to create environment variables. And this is going to depend on our Redis service right here. So Redis, we're just going to run the Redis stack server, which is the latest version of that image. We're going to expose some ports. Again, map the same environment file. We're going to create a volume here. So that way, if you spin this down and spin it back up, you'll have some persistence. And then lastly, we've got a health check. This is optional, but it's probably good practice. So when you run Docker Compose, it takes the information you've put in this compose file, along with the Docker containers and all of the specifics you've outlined, and actually creates everything you need. A network layer creates containers that are going to run with these specific settings, and they can talk to each other. And so that's what we've done here. Inside your terminal, there are logs that show our Redis app. This is all the like startup Redis log, and then our Streamlit app. These are the startup Streamlit logs. So if you've never run this before, the first time it's going to actually have to pull some documents down, and it's going to store them, embed them, and store them in Redis. So now you can navigate to localhost 8080, where the Streamlit app is running. And here we go. We've got Redis OpenAI Q&A application. And this data set isn't the most exciting, unfortunately, but it is about the 2020 Summer Olympics. So it's a bunch of Wikipedia articles that have been scraped and chunked up. And I think OpenAI actually hosts this data set. So there's a bunch of documentation online. So I can ask questions now. So I can say things like, who won the men's pole vault competition? And so this is going to follow the workflow that we identified below. So we ask the question, goes to OpenAI first, then goes to Redis, creates the prompt, and returns that information to OpenAI to get an answer. And you can see we actually get a response. And so this is useful because the difference between Q&A and just pure semantic search or document retrieval is that it's an additional layer on top. They both have their use cases. They both have places where they're super valuable in business context and in the real world. So for Q&A, users expect a little bit more specificity with the results. So the benefit here is that we're not allowing the language model to just make up some answer. Because if I ask this question to ChatGPT, although ChatGPT might know the answer, but if I ask this question directly to, like, for example, the Da Vinci model, it's quite possible that it's just gonna come up with something random. And we don't want it to have these hallucinations. That's kind of what we call it. So this is useful in a lot of business cases where you actually can't have it make something up. You need it to be correct. And one way to do that is to enforce it to use a context that you create. And this is where a vector database comes into play. And you need this to be fast. So you can see these are the documents that were identified by the vector database as, hey, these might be relevant or interesting documents to use in trying to answer the question. And of course, the first one you can see is a document about the pole vault event at the 2020 Summer Olympics. So I hope this is a helpful starting place. Of course, different data sets, different combinations of APIs. There are all sorts of different community tools like LangChain and GPT Index to do more sophisticated chat-based apps or question and answering apps that are much more mature. So we're really looking forward to see what you all build using the power of OpenAI and other language models and Redis as a real-time vector database and ML feature storage engine. So you know where to find us. We're on the Discord. We're going to be in touch. Reach out to us. We're looking forward to this. Thanks, everyone.